Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Make Startups podcast. I am your host, Eric Parker. Today we have Vahé Heboyan with us. He has a PhD in applied economics and is a professor of health economics, as well as the director of the Health and Behavioral Economics Research Lab at Augusta University. Vahé, thank you for being on with us today.
Pleasure, Eric, as always.
I'm excited about this conversation. I know we've worked together off and on for probably about 10 years in the sort of intersection between entrepreneurship and public health. And I remember in one of the first conversations we had, you made a really strong point about really centering a conversation that you can point to economics at the core of like why everything happens. And this is probably a broad and vague question, but like how how does your theory of economics just sort of play into all of what we do? Maybe not in society, that's probably too big of a question, but at least as far as in entrepreneurship and in our community health.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. Well, we need to take a step back at the kind of the basic definition of economics, right? It's basically what economics is. It's allocation of the scarce resources to the best uses or users. At the personal level, you can think about our own resources that we have. And again, in economics, we don't talk about money only. That's the finance field. In economics, it's any resource we have, right? So if you think about it's our knowledge, it's our experience, it's the time that we have, and plus our bank account or the funds that we have in our possession. So it's a combination of all those. So the question is, how do you maximize the use of it, right? What are the best users? Like I sometimes when I teach, I bring the example of you wake up in the morning and you have a decision to make, to stay in the bed or to go to work, right? So it's an economic decision to make. Because if you stay at bed, well, you are losing some money, but then you are gaining happiness from, lounging and relaxing and maybe watching a TV, having a coffee in bed. But when you go to work, you are giving that up in order to earn money, right? To be used later on. So those are the types of the decisions that we make at a personal level every day. And as a society, we make similar decisions, right? Think about any governmental or non-governmental organization. They have limited resources, right? Again, we go back to their funding, their personnel, their knowledge, their experience, expertise, and so on. So every year or every day, they are faced with the decision of how do we capitalize on our resources. So that's what economics does at the personal level, at the organizational as well as the societal level, is how do we get the best out of what we have?
Yeah. So I guess in that, what do you think most people need to understand about economics? We'll keep it narrowed in a lens of in the world of entrepreneur support. What are they not understanding about economics that maybe they should from your observations so far in the field?
Well, I would say that, or I won't claim that they don't understand, but I think that when the way economics plays into the field of entrepreneurship is the same thing. Again, as an entrepreneurs, as an organizations like yours that supports entrepreneurship in our communities and so on, you are faced with the same challenge that we individuals face every morning, right? So you have your limited resources, and then how do you use to the best way possible, right? And economics is grounded in everything. I think that's one of the kind of notions that I try to convey to people that I talk about this is the same entrepreneurs, the same organizations, they need to make the best out of what they are given. And in this context, I think one of the things we need to realize is we spend lots of time, let's say your organization, right, spends lots of time, put lots of human resources on the line to help entrepreneurs. The question is this time maximizing the outcomes that we are trying to get from entrepreneurs, right? From entrepreneurship perspective, economics is basically driving their decision making in terms of what to produce, how to produce, and where to produce, right? Either services or the products. So I think having the fundamental knowledge of the field itself, the economics, and how it plugs into the entrepreneurial decision making, I think that becomes kind of a key here.
So to me, the interesting challenge in this, like the pull that I feel in the world of entrepreneur support, is kind of what are the right things to measure related to whether we are using resources effectively and getting the right impacts. And I think a lot of times, people in this work, they feel like they're just chasing sort of externalized metrics, and that it turns the work into something that's more performative than meaningful. And do you think there's a difference between the sort of like external reporting metrics and the internal metrics to help you figure out how you're allocating those resources?
Well, obviously, I think entrepreneurs have their own internal metrics, right, to measure their success or their performance. And then as a society or as a community organizations that they are trying to support, they have their own. So as an entrepreneur, you are faced both with your internal metrics and then also the metrics that comes from the external. You think about the support organization like yours, you think about the funders and the funding agencies and so on that are supporting, they have their own agendas, right? Sometimes those might not overlap, or the overlap might be not complete. For example, if there's a funding organization out there, they might have a different time horizon for the outcomes to start generating. As a small business entrepreneur or entrepreneur in general, your outcomes might be different. Your time horizon might be different, right? So that's where I think there's this disconnect between internal and external one. But I think one of the keys is to differentiate that the outcomes are going to evolve, right? The outcomes that we are going to measure. I mean, in the short run, you want to focus on the things that are very critical to start growing the businesses, right? And then there's the medium range and then the longer term outcomes. And it's tough environment, right? Not every business is going to be successful overnight. It takes years for the businesses to become sustainable and become generating revenue and showing some the positive side, right? So I think as organizations or as individuals who are trying to look into or evaluate these organizations, we need to realize that there's a time horizon difference. So we need to look into that. I think one of the keys that I try to emphasize is the capacity building outcomes, like especially for organizations like it, because what you do, you build capacity, right? And when you build the capacity, it is not going to show you overnight results from entrepreneurial side, right? But people are gaining the knowledge. They are understanding better how to manage, or what does it take to manage, because not everybody is fit to become an entrepreneur, even though they might have a terrific idea. So I think from that perspective, having this time-bound kind of outcomes to measure becomes kind of a critical, and recognizing that internal and external stakeholders might have different time horizons to deal with.
Yeah. Well, so I think maybe this brings me to how we initially came to work together, and that was in relation to doing a project with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And that was an interesting case for me because before that project began, I had no idea that there was a way of describing a relationship between entrepreneurship and community health. And I'm wondering if you can probably better articulate how these things relate to one another than I can.
Well, I mean, when you look into the traditional model, for solving community health problems or providing services and resources to improve community health, the traditional model has basically worked that either governmental organization, local, state, federal level are going to intervene in providing services and support. Like you can think about it as the local departments of public health or the CDC and so on, right? Or there are nonprofits around the town or around the communities that do provide certain services that are aimed at improving population's health in these communities, right? And one of the biggest problem with this model is that nothing is guaranteed. In other words, the communities can only plan for a 12-month horizon. There is nowhere for a community to plan beyond the 12th month because All this organization, either governmental or non-governmental organization, they're budgeting for 12 months, right? And then they're evaluating their priorities, evaluating their budgets on every year. And a project that is vital for the community might be of high priority to the funding agency one day, and then not a priority at all in the next day, right? So what happens is that the community starts something really nice, starts to see some initial good results, then boom, funding is pulled out, and things are collapsing. I think that's where I think our conversations were leading, were focused around those, because one thing we realized is that there might be an opportunity for the entrepreneurial community to step in and try to provide more sustainable solutions. Like every kind of let's say in academia, we worked through the funded grants, right? So one of the biggest components that the funding agencies ask us is, well, what's your sustainability plan, right? So that becomes the key. So there's no sustainability plan per se, because in many cases, the moment funding is over, things are collapsing unless you build the sustainability. And entrepreneurship, I think, becomes this key, small business entrepreneurship in each community, to be able to build the sustainability so that communities don't fully rely on governmental or non-governmental funding sources that might disappear the next funding period.
Yeah, the other part that was fascinating to me was realizing, like I had never heard the term social determinants of health, right? And can you, yeah, what for someone who doesn't know, what does that mean?
Well, our health is impacted from different dimensions, right? There are some health conditions we are born with. Some conditions articulate over time because of our genetics as well as our health behaviors. For example, people who choose to smoke, or people who choose to drink excess alcohol or do other activities that have negative impact on the health, over time is going to articulate, right? So those are some of the main things that impact our health. But also there's the other component, which is your environment, the place you grow up, right? You might remember years ago the story about Flint, Michigan, right? Remember the water contamination
Yeah.
and all the things and so on. Well, that's the environmental factor, right? People who live in such environments are exposed to the environmental factors that have adverse or positive effects on their health, right? So that's where the social determinants of health comes into the play, where what basic articulates that the social environment, the culture, and are important determinants of our health. And economic well-being is one of the key social determinants of the health. It's the economics of the neighborhoods. Think about people who live in poor neighborhoods, right? From the very childhood, children are exposed to bad education. Well, not bad education, but more like schools that are less funded, which also impacts the education they get. Now, you'll ask, well, what's the relationship with the health? Well, the education is critical component because it defines how your life trajectory is going to evolve over time, right? Whether or not you are going to be living a prosperous life, which also is going to help you to have the economic means to have a better health, right? Think about eating habits, right? If children growing up on the fast food, junk food, well, their health trajectory is going to be different rather than another child that is growing on more home-cooked meal or higher quality meals, right? So all of that are important components. At first, you see there's no connection between education and the health, right? But then when you kind of dig deeper, the connection is there. So those are the items, the social determinants of health, that become kind of a critical in figuring out what our health will be or the health of the population.
Yeah. So I remember when we were doing that project and really looking at it and realizing that the social determinants of health really comprised about 50% of how a community's health is measured, and how those social determinants impact, your long-term health outcomes. And I see a lot in our field where we're consistently talking about how, um, entrepreneurship is responsible for virtually all net new job creation. Like we dig in constantly, sort of like at the important role of entrepreneurship um, in the economic health of our communities overall. Um, and I felt like a huge part of that project was beginning to establish this tie that if we know that economics are important for community health and we know entrepreneurship is important for economic health, how do we bridge the gap to um, directly connect entrepreneurship to community health? And where do you see the sort of consensus of that right now? And do you see more opportunities for those in the world of entrepreneur support to partner with those in the community health space?
Obviously, I think the connection is very strong there, right? Again, health is driven from to certain part from our economic well-being. If we are economically well off as individuals, as families, as communities, then we can afford to have a better health. We can afford better food. We can afford better shelter. We can afford um, to live in healthier neighborhoods. We can afford to have access to physical activity, for example, go to the gym because we might have the financial means as well as the time to pay for all of this, right? All of this combined are going to result in an improved health, not only for the individual, but also their families and so on. So again, it goes back to the economic well-being, right? And the jobs, right? Do people have jobs? In some cases, the traditional job markets are doing very well, where people find jobs based on their skills, based on their experience, and so on. But in many cases, especially in rural communities, it's very hard to find jobs because this type of jobs. I think this is where the entrepreneurship becomes critical to be able to kind of help individuals in these communities who have passion for entrepreneurship, who are have ideas that can become entrepreneurial solutions to be able to prosper and to be able to kind of establish their own small businesses that potentially can grow. The other impact is the indirect impact. Once a small business gets established, one of the first things for their growth is to hire additional people, and they are going to reach out and hire their community members. So by supporting, let's say, a single entrepreneurial project or idea, in a medium to long run, you are supporting many members of the community, and which is also, because of the economic effect, is going to help to improve the health of the community overall.
Yeah, yeah, and you have another project that you've been doing over the last year or so to me that's fascinating, and what you've been looking into. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the connection between, or maybe the role that entrepreneurship can play in recovery populations and helping them. Well, maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, over the last 5, 6 years, me and several colleagues from Augusta University have been working with the recovery community. Again, we're talking about recovery from opioid and substance use disorders. Community in rural communities in Georgia to try to provide different kind of services to improve the overall health of the population who are struggling with opioids or substance use disorders, right? And over the time, one of the things that we realized that there are a couple of critical barriers for longer term recovery of the individuals. And one of the barriers is basically the economics of the things, right? The jobs, whether or not these individuals will have the job. Because if you don't have the job, that is going to potentially kind of lead to some depressive experiences and so on, which has the potential to lead to relapse. And this is something that we want to avoid in the recovery community, right? However, if you have the jobs, that provides you with the economic livelihood, not only for yourself, for your family as well. So you are able to rent or buy a house. You are able to have the means of transportation. You have a steady income potentially, right? So the traditional job markets don't necessarily work well with this population because of different reasons that have to do with their past choices and so on. It's really hard for them to be hired in the traditional jobs. So that's why
Basically, like they might have been involved in the criminal justice system and things like that.
then
Yeah.
someone runs a background check and things start to pop up. And employers, because there's lots of stigma in the community, let me put it this way.
Right.
And because of the stigma and so on, the traditional markets are not efficient for them. Now, some of them are individuals that have certain skills, like trade skills or ideas that potentially can become entrepreneurial solutions to create a small business for themselves, right? So when that's when we realize that this again goes back to the basics of the economics, is that that's what is sometimes pulling these individuals back into relapse. So we kind of launched a pilot project where we said, well, if the economics is the barrier, why don't we try to remove this barrier? Let's try to do some capacity building where we'll identify individuals who have an interest, passion, and they are fit to become entrepreneurs and help them to better understand what is entrepreneurship. And again, we are talking about small business entrepreneurship. We're not talking about the next tech giants and so on. These are, think about your neighborhood HVAC small business or tattoo shop and this type of stuff, right? Predominantly trade skill based entrepreneurial outcomes. So that was what we wanted to do, and to pilot it, try to see if our thoughts were correct. So we launched the project in Northeast Georgia, where we kind of invited several individuals who were already in recovery. They started the journey. They're active parts of the recovery community organizations in their own community, and we started to work with them to build the capacity on entrepreneurship, starting from the very basic. What is entrepreneurship, right? What does it take to be successful? What is the sacrifice your family need to make when you start owning your own business and starting to grow the business and so on, right? So those are the key components, and that we started, and we had some really interesting and very positive, reassuring results. And I think this is one of the things that would like to kind of continue going. And again, some of the results because your organization got involved with helping us with some of the capacity building aspects of the things, and which was very helpful, right? And so this is the direction I think that, again, as a professional who is very curious about what's next for me intellectually, I think this is the area that I think has lots of promise and also has lots of need in our communities.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, whether you talk about people exiting the criminal justice system or people dealing with recovery from addiction, I mean, my own personal belief is that there's a huge opportunity space and a huge need to support them. My observation in supporting the program that you were doing in Northeast Georgia is that, well, a couple things. One, it's such a tight knit community that's really supportive of one another. It's very similar to startup communities in that way. I felt like because of the nature of what was going on, there was a higher a need for a higher standard of care, maybe around people that it seemed to me that some of them had some real anxiety issues, and we had to be. It's like if you had to be honest and direct about the possibilities of their business, but you had to figure out how to temper it in a way because they were really prone to shutting down if they got, bad news about something. And, I guess what have you learned so far from working with this community about, well, one, like, is your research panning out, or is it too soon to know what impact this has on people? And then the other part of it is, are there specific things that you think people should know if they want, their entrepreneur support organization to do this type of work?
I mean, you raise a good issue, and I think it is not only basically people shutting down or people having anxiety with presenting. I think that was one of the things came up right when we're about to pitch their ideas and so on. I think it is typical to anyone. Yeah, I mean, some people are very natural about public speaking. Some people don't feel comfortable speaking publicly, right? I don't think it is limited to a certain subpopulation. I think it's more general. But your observation was right. The community itself is very tight. They are very supportive of each other because they understand what the other person is going through. I see lots of support that comes from individuals that have been already years in recovery towards the ones that are just entering the recovery journey, right? So there's lots of support. I think that also creates this genuine opportunity to build this capacity because you have this they're community mentors that some are successful business individuals already, right? So they are very eager to give back to the community, and so you can tap into that resource as a very significant source of mentorship for longer term success and so on. But overall, I think we started to work with the individuals in recovery because our project was in that field, and we identified the barrier because of our project, right? But I think the model that we were able to develop, which is again a focus of entrepreneurial capacity building for a small or micro enterprises. Again, we can think about, again, trade skill based in enterprises that don't require significant investments from the local communities or whoever the funding organization is. But the upside is pretty high because we are already seeing that the impact that our project is making, not only to create small businesses. We didn't expect that every single participant is going to open the doors of their business once the project was over. Project was only for like 4 months overall, right? We did see some of them open their own businesses, but also we saw through some of the surveys and so on that people have reported increased capacity that they had before in understanding entrepreneurship, in their own confidence, in their own skills, whether or not this is something that they can do, right? So in many cases, there are lots of people who have passions, they have hobbies, they have certain skills. In many cases, people don't do anything with it other than fixing something around the house because they are afraid of what's coming next. They are afraid of the unknown or the journey itself, right? I think what our project did, or the model that we have developed did, is help them to better understand what the journey is going to look like. Now, it's not going to be for everybody, as you know very well, with the small business community supporting for over a decade. But at least it clarifies things for the individuals and give them an opportunity not only to seek traditional jobs, but also have an alternative that potentially for certain individuals can become very viable alternative to provide livelihoods.
Yeah, and you were able to do this obviously because you had grant funding to do this type of research. But over the long term, and I think this is the opportunity space, is the work that we've also been doing around workforce development and entrepreneurship. Like the vast majority of these entrepreneurs were facing employment challenges, correct? And maybe even in poverty. And so I'm guessing that the vast majority of them would qualify for workforce funding. The question is, are we able to develop the data behind the scenes to prove to workforce boards in their local regions that this is a viable pathway for them, to succeed in employing themselves?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the game, again, comes back to the initial topic we started this conversation. It's economics. It's the return on investment, right? Whoever is the funding agency, we did have the funding that our funding agency authorized us to use for a pilot. But again, we didn't have like a humongous amount of funding to pull this. So it was a very small amount, and that's the beauty. When you do a capacity building and focus on the types of the businesses that don't require substantial investments to grow and to get them sustainable, I think that's where I think the communities can leverage their scarce resources to create something that has a high return on investment. Again, from let's say, take a community, like a county government, for example, right, that struggles with high unemployment, struggles with individuals not being able to find jobs and so on, right? If they were to invest into this type of a capacity building projects, that is not going to require substantial funds from their annual budget, but is going to have a very high upside, because you potentially provide employment opportunities not only to the owners of the small businesses, but also the individuals who are going to be employed by them. Out of a sudden, in many cases, people are taken off the welfare because now they're making they're productive members of the society and they're earning income. So they're often
and paying taxes.
They're paying the taxes for the very same local government. And over the time, they are going to employ other individuals. Again, and most of these individuals are going to come from their very own community, whether or not it's a community in general, the county, the small town, and so on, or it's this very niche community of the recovery, individuals in recovery, or it can be any other small subpopulation. Our model is not typical, or it's not working only for the individuals in recovery. You can think about any other subpopulations that are characterized with very high unemployment and very low likelihood of succeeding in the traditional job markets because of different reasons, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, I think when you look at the numbers, when you look at the financials, if a community, if a county government or a state government is interested in kind of investing into this, these are one of those low investment, potentially higher return type of the opportunities that are going to generate pretty high return investment. As a policymaker, as a individual legislature who is in charge of the budget allocations and so on, at the end of the day, that's what we are looking, right? Because every state, every county has limited resources. That's our economic resources, right? So we want to allocate these to the source or users that are going to generate the highest return, right? Because that's the basic definition of the economics we started this conversation with. So it all is a circle. It just comes back to that very basic definitions.
It's always about economics.
There you go.
Yeah. No, so on that subject though, because I honestly view the research work that you're doing as incredibly important for our field overall, and I'm curious, what are is this research ongoing? What are the opportunities to expand it? If other organizations want to participate so that you can build a richer data set, is there anything that what opportunities exist here?
A lot. Opportunities are a lot, and that's what we are pursuing right now. We are trying to work basically because the project that you referenced to last year from last summer was a pilot project. It was very small in scope, and we just wanted to create a proof of concept because the concept was in our minds, and we wanted to make sure it does work in the community when you try to implement the model, right? And we did get some really good, encouraging results. So the next step is to try to scale up, try to see how that will work at a larger scale. And again, we're not talking about like statewide, but we are talking about maybe increasing the size of the participation to look into the economics of scale, so on.
Yeah.
So next step for us is basically right now we are in the process of trying to acquire additional funding to be able to go to the next step. The way other organizations can be involved, and they can be either governmental organization like local community governments or state governments or even federal government, or it can be any other organization like a for-profit or non-for-profit that is interested in supporting the entrepreneurial capacity building in their own communities. The model exists, right? The model starts with the assessment of the community resources that can be leveraged to be able to deliver the capacity building. And then the capacity building training comes into the play. And one of the ways we can engage is having conversations with these individuals who are interested in implementing something in their communities and trying to see how we can be very helpful.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And I really think in the next phase, because as you said, everything sort of goes on to sustainability and capacity building, right? And ultimately, I think we have to address how we can do this work over the long haul beyond a grant reporting period. And I think, like my belief is that workforce development can play a significant role within that because of the alignment of these things. And so, yeah, I think the work that we do continues to align in that space. So I'm excited for that. The sort of one thing I kind of wanted to close on is, the thing that I've struggled with a lot and that's driven so much of my work is when you see the last 40 years in America and you see the steady decline in entrepreneurship rates. You see a society where we have recovery issues on a level that probably we historically have not had. There's a lot that points to a society that's in pain because our economy itself might not be functioning correctly, or functioning to benefit everybody in the best way possible. Um, I've been reading a book lately called Capital Evolution, about it's like Capital Evolution, the new American economy, and it really is talking about this shift that appears to be underway from sort of neoliberal capitalism into a dynamic capitalism that begins to look, in addition to the concept of shareholder primacy, in towards basically how do you take more stakeholders in your community, in your company, like whether it's your employees, whether it's your customers, whether it's the broader community, into account. And I'm curious, just looking at this really through the broader economic lens, what do you what are you seeing as the steps that maybe we need to take so that we do have broader based opportunity for people?
Well, I mean, you raised very kind of a broad kind of a questions about the economy of the country and so on. I leave that to a more famous economist to debate those issues. I think uh, our focus needs to be on our own communities. What can we do with our within our communities to improve the um, entrepreneurial infrastructure and the support that we can provide? Because sometimes all it takes is a very small support to our aspiring entrepreneurs to get going, right? Um, and I think that's the key. It is a very low effort and how potentially high reward type of the activity that we need to be focusing on. I think one of the things that I have lived in the United States for 20 plus years now, and one of the things I have seen is that uh, our society discounting trade education, discounting the trade skill set. I mean, we all of us need plumbers, need electricians, need the HVAC people, and so on, right? But for some reason, it is never in a conversation for the younger generation about pursuing trade skills, right? Um, and like in many cases, as a common citizen in my community, I had a need for tradesmen to come and do certain type of trade-related work on my house. It's very challenging to find someone. I think that's where the niche is within our communities to grow the capacity for some individuals who are really good electricians, for example, to maybe open their own business and try to grow it, or the plumbers or the HVAC people or the people who are painters and so on. And through our pilot program, that's what we saw is that sometimes because there are people that come with lots of experience already, they went through the technical school, they got the certification needed, and so on and so on. But one component that they don't learn in all this education is how to start and run a business, right? So I think that's the key here. Is it's like it's a circle, but there's a missing link there, right? And that entrepreneurial capacity becomes the missing link. If we are to incorporate that in our education system about what is small business, how do we become a small business person, or right outside of it, there's an organization like yours or ours that is providing those type of capacity building. I think that becomes the key to help our community. If we can grow a community at a time, then it's going to have the spillover effects on the overall economy. So
Yeah. No, I see it all the time that in our circles when we're having conversations with economic development and so forth, they think of building startups as building high tech venture backed companies. And again, historically, that's just like maybe we'll have a 5 to 10% success rate with that, and then even you're optimizing companies to raise venture capital as opposed to build revenues for themselves. And it seems like we've done a disservice to our local community. I understand everybody will talk about Maslow's hierarchy and whatnot, and why we need to focus on this top of a pyramid to make things happen. But what you're really saying is, instead of feeling every day like we're trying to boil the ocean and fix everything that's wrong with the society, if we can do the little things to help a tradesman run a cash flow positive business when they start off, that and doing that at scale in our local community, we might make a broader impact in the health of our community.
absolutely. Again, we cannot affect directly how the national economy is going to perform. I mean, in our community. However, we can affect what's happening in our own community. Over the conversations at the beginning of this capacity building project that we had last year, like at the beginning, I would ask individuals like who are tradespeople who are very knowledgeable about their trade. They have like expertise. They have years of experience in this. I would ask very basic questions: that what's your pricing mechanism? And many people couldn't answer that question. How are they? What's their revenue source? What's the revenue model? Right. So these are the things. Even though they are experts in their field, they fail to be able to properly understand, provide the proper answer to questions like that, which are vital for the success of the business, right? So that's
Yeah.
where we come into place. We are not trying to teach an electrician how to be an electrician. No, that's not our role. Our role is how to teach an electrician how do you capitalize on your skill set, your expertise, and build a business around what you like to enjoy doing and what you are good at. If we can do this in the communities, and you alluded well about that, historically, our focus has been on giant tech companies that require very large amounts of investments through angel capital ventures and so on and so on. That's not our purpose. There are organizations that are focused on that. They've been doing it for decades. They're good at it, and let them do it. Our focus is on microenterprises, something that takes very small amount of investment to get going. If you, again, think about someone who wants to start their own electrical business, right? It doesn't take like hundreds of thousands of investments to make this happening, right? Usually they start with some of the tools are vital, some of the better understanding the revenue model, some of the promotional activity, marketing, and so on to get things going, right? So again, I think if we stay focused on this niche opportunity and we are able to make a difference in our communities, and if large number of communities are making this type of a difference, out of a sudden this is having a national impact.
Yeah, well, I think it's hugely important. I wish you luck as you continue to build out the research around it, because for us to do what we do in our field, we need proof that these things work, that goes beyond our own anecdotal stories around things. So yeah, I think that there's a possibility for entrepreneur support organizations to step away from that constant pull that they have towards training people to raise venture capital, and educating the people who fund us on the fact that we have a population that just needs training on the basics of how to manage a balance sheet, and that'll make the difference. So best of luck with all of that. And I appreciate you coming on today, and, look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity, and nice chat. As always, look forward to the next opportunities.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in.